Welcome everyone to the fourth installment of the A&A Legacy series, in which we get acquainted with the legends, heroes, and icons of the numismatic hobby. I'm your host, Barbara Gregory, Editor-in-Chief of the Numismatist magazine. This evening we are very pleased to welcome two special guests, Jim Halperin, co-chairman, and Steve Ivey, co-chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Heritage Auctions, based here in Dallas. The two formed the company in 1982, and today it offers a wide range of U.S. and world coins and paper money, fine art, vintage comic books, movie posters, entertainment and music memorabilia, sports collectibles, historical and political memorabilia, rare books and manuscripts, Civil War memorabilia, the list goes on, fine and rare wine, luxury real estate, and more. Heritage Auctions is the largest collectibles auctioneer and the third largest auction house in the world, as well as the largest auction house established in the United States. Jim Halperin was born in Boston in 1952. By age 16, he was running his own part-time rare stamp and coin dealership. In 1968, he gained early admission to Harvard College, but by his third semester, he realized he enjoyed the coin business more than his studies and left school to pursue a full-time career in numismatics. In late 1971, he opened New England Rare Coin Galleries in Framingham, Massachusetts, and his subsidiary, New England Rare Coin Auctions, conducted its first sale at the New England Numismatic Association convention in Boston in November 1975. Steve Ivey was born in 1949 in Waco, Texas, and by age 14 was selling rare coins in national publications. In 1970, at age 20, he incorporated and opened a numismatic business in downtown Dallas. 6 years later, he launched Steve Ivey Rare Coin Auctions. He managed the business and also served as chief buyer, handling millions of coins over the course of the next decade. The two men met early in their careers, and over the years they have forged a friendship and a very successful business. Welcome, Steve and Jim, and we are so very pleased that you could join us this evening. Jim, I'd like to start with you. You've said that your first brush with coins was when you were 8 or 9 years old, but you went into the stamp business first, opening Jim's Stamp Shop when you were 16. What was it about stamps that originally caught your eye?
Well, I knew a little about stamps, and I actually knew values, or a little bit about the values of stamps. I knew nothing about coins except how to read the dates on them. And I had never heard of Coin World. I had never seen a red book. And I just added coins to the sign as an afterthought, figuring might as well have two product lines.
Some room left.
Yeah. Kids in the neighborhood came in and asked me where my coins were, and I said, well, I don't have any coins yet. And I said, I actually don't know anything about coins. And they said, well, we'll teach you. And somehow I managed to talk a few of them into working for me for free. And within a month or two, I, had kind of figured out how to sort of know what coins were worth. And I would ride my bike up and down the street. I mean, back then there used to be coin shops everywhere. Mm-hmm. I would go from one to another and buy from one and sell to another, and eventually, I figured out that I liked coins a lot more than stamps. And I just could remember them really well. I could, anytime I saw a coin, I could remember if it was better or worse than any other coin I had prized.
And you didn't have the same situation with stamps?
Well, I think a lot of people could do that with stamps. Maybe the talent was a little rarer with coins. I don't know, but I just had more of an affinity for them.
And you had mentioned too that you went into coins as a summer business project, something mm-hmm. that you hadn't intended to stay with, but obviously it proved more lucrative and more fascinating for you.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I mean, it was fun, and I liked the people that I met I liked the other dealers. They were very supportive and kind of taught me a lot. It was a great community back then.
That's great.
Yeah.
Steve, I love the answer that you give people when they ask what you did before you were in the coin business. You say, and I quote, "I was in 5th grade." From your first exposure to old coins in a friend's cigar box to your quick obsession with numismatics and the idea of making money, you've been on a roll. Did you ever dream that you, a self-described strange young man, would be where you are today?
Well, I always had delusions of grandeur at a young age. And frankly, I didn't know any better. I didn't, when you get into something when you're 12 years old, you don't have any context. So, and I was always fascinated with money. I was a greedy young kid. I loved making money. When I say strange young man, as an example, when my parents or my mother used to take me to the store, most kids would gravitate to where the toys were. Well, I'd gravitate to the business supplies. And so I love the concept of collecting. I love the concept of making lists. And after a while, I figured out I could, sell to my neighbors and make money doing that. One summer, I mowed lawns for about 2 months to make money to buy coins. And after a while, I figured out that really wasn't my destiny. And so I decided to start buying and selling coins to neighborhood kids. By that time, I was probably about 11. And that led to going to coin shows, local coin shows, and setting up tables. And so that's basically how it evolved. I don't think I ever envisioned where we would be today, but I don't think I ever not. I mean, I didn't. It was impossible to have any appreciation for where it's grown to at that point in time. But I never really felt I couldn't do anything.
And Steve, you delivered a talk to members of the early American Coppers Group entitled "Reflections of an Unemployable Numismatist." And then in this presentation, you mentioned that you were a fresh-faced 22-year-old kid when a man came into your shop in Dallas with 1,100 bags of silver to sell and later 5,600 Krugerrands. Did your dealings with him affect the way you did business? And if I might ask, can you tell us who that gentleman was?
Well, his name was Howard Slatter. And at the time, he seemed very old to me, but he was probably about 50. And yeah, it did change in many respects, from the sense that it gave me a pretty broad idea of what the size of the market was at that point in time. I mean, not that I didn't know there was a lot of money out there, but when you're actually involved in a transaction like that at an early age, it gave me, it raised my horizons, if you will. And it also told me that even though I was just 22 years old, people trusted me. And in this particular case, it was, quite a bit, it was millions of dollars. And it also gave me the confidence to deal with other people like that.
And he was not familiar with you previously before he walked into your shop?
Not at all. He had never seen me, and I'd never seen him before.
Did you have a relationship after that?
We did, for a long time. As a matter of fact, sort of a funny story, after about 2 or 3 years, he said, I have a daughter that has a duplex, and she's not very good at running it. At the time, my wife and I were married and lived in an apartment. And he said, would you like to buy this duplex so you can handle the business aspect of it, which obviously wasn't very much, but it was more than she could handle. And so he basically sold me the duplex for a relatively inexpensive sum at the time. It was probably market. And so his daughter became my tenant. And then we had a long relationship after that, probably another 15 or 20 years before he passed away.
Jim, back to you. You dropped out of Harvard in 1971 to go into business full-time, opening New England Rare Coin Galleries. And at that time, your father wasn't happy about your decision, but
He was
came
not pleased, no.
He came around, I understand. But what hopes did your father have for you, and in turn, what hopes do you have for your sons?
Well, that's a really good question. You know, I think my dad he was really proud when I got in to Harvard. And he had been a Harvard Business School graduate. Finished Harvard on the GI Bill. He really valued education. He valued his education, credited it with much of his success in life. And I wanted to be like my dad, so I had always wanted to go to Harvard and Harvard Business School and follow in his footsteps and be as much like him as possible. Really, really admired my dad my whole life. Still do. But I was not, you know, he had normal brain wiring, and I was ADHD and maybe a little Asperger's, and you know, he was somebody who could really connect with people and was very present at the moment, very funny, and you know, a brilliant guy. And I was a different kind of brilliant. I was, you know, probably a lot better at math than he was, but he, you know, I couldn't communicate like he could, or you know, really look people in the eye like he could. I mean, I was just wired differently. And school wasn't for me either. I just can't really absorb knowledge by listening to people talk. I have to see it. And so even though I was good at school because I could take the tests, you know, if I sat in a room and I was in front of a piece of paper, I would become that piece of paper. And so I always tested great. But I wasn't really that good a student other than that. And I think I could just figure things out better than I could memorize things. And I wanted to get out in the world. So I told him I was taking a leave of absence because I knew that would sell better, but I think I knew that the chances that I would go back were slim.
And you mentioned too that your father came around after.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How many years after that?
Oh, months. I mean,
months.
Yeah. He was, you know. I mean, you know, he was a great dad. He wasn't stubborn like that. He was just a little. He was like, "You're going to go back, right?" I mean, you know, it was that kind of thing. But no, he didn't.
And do you have similar hopes for your sons? Or?
You know, I just want them to find their roles. You know, my kids are very different from each other, and they're both, you know, they're both magnificent in different ways, and they're in a better position to figure out what's going to make them happy in life than I am. I love the fact that my younger son wants to come into the business at Heritage, and I hope he doesn't change his mind. But if he does, I can live with that, as long as he's happy.
What are you doing to prepare him for that possible inevitability?
Well, the inevitability, which inevitability?
Of him coming to work at Heritage.
Well, that's not, he says he is, but it's not inevitable at all. But he's been an intern at Heritage every summer for in 4 or 5 different departments, and you know, he's really good at everything, and he's a lot like my dad, much more like my dad than I am. Really can connect with people, and he's much quicker than I am, and he's a good student too, but he's more he's more of a people person.
That's great.
And I think he'll do great, whatever he decides to do, and I would love to work with him. That would make me happy, but just him being happy will make me happy
That's
too.
Great. Steve, what part did your attendance at A&A conventions in 1965, 66, and 67, your first big shows, play in your performance at the University of Texas at Austin?
Well, first of all, let me be clear, 65, 66, and 67 was before I went to school. I graduated from high school in '67 and entered the University of Texas that fall. But there was obviously an influence of me being at those shows because once again, it introduced me to an environment that I was unfamiliar with, going to local shows to see the size of the industry. And it got me more hooked, if you will, in the business part of it. So by the time I got to high school, I was already, I already knew what I wanted to do. By the time I went to the University of Texas, I already knew what I wanted to do. So basically, like Jim, I went through the motions I lasted until my sophomore year, my fall semester of my junior year before I quit. But all during that time, I was doing coins, going to coin shows. Fortunately, University of Texas is a big school, so I was able to basically not go to any classes and cram before the test, and made a decent average. I was probably a C+ student at the time. And then in the fall of '69, after my spring semester of my junior year, I decided that this wasn't for me. I wanted to go out and open an office, get in it full time. And I told my parents, and they were fine with it.
They're good.
Well,
you've noted, Steve, that in the summer following your first year at school, you went to Southern California, which you called the, quote, center of the numismatic universe. You offered your services to A-Mark Coin Company, but the firm turned you down. And in retrospect, you admit that probably you would have made a horrible employee. Now, why is that?
Well, nobody in my family going back several generations has been an employee of another company. So I think there's something genetic in it. I don't think I would have been good at taking suggestions, if you will, or I'd want to do things.
No, you wouldn't have.
Yeah. I would have wanted to do things my way, and I would have probably gained some experience, but I would, and maybe for a few months I would have been a decent employee, but over a long term, they would pretty much have to let me do everything after a while.
Jim, is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And Steve, in 1975, you hired a 16-year-old kid named Kevin Lipton to work for you at the ANA show in Los Angeles. And that same year, in response to Jim's starting...
Yeah, that was after I fired him, by the way.
Fired him. And that same year, in response to Jim's starting an auction company, you hired a local junior high school history teacher named Bob Merrill to help you launch your own auction company. What were your expectations as you went up against the major auction houses of the time?
I don't think I really had any expectations relative to them. I just thought that it was another natural progression for my business at the time, and my expectations were to make a profit and to grow the business. I mean, I don't think I ever said, next year's my goal is to knock off Stax or the Goldbergs or Abner Kreisberg or Lester Merkin or whoever the great ones were at the time. It was just to have a successful business.
And Jim, along the same lines, you cite a number of dealers and other numismatists who helped you in your early years. How did you feel when you and Steve joined forces? Did you feel like the Young Turk, or were you more a grassroots dealer trying to find your way?
Well, how did I feel when we became partners?
Right.
Well, it was it was sort of a new adventure. It was kind of by necessity also, because the coin business was really bad that year. And I was insolvent. I had more debt than assets. And I just wanted to pay all my creditors. And I knew I could. I had complete confidence that the business was going to succeed, but this was a way to pay them faster. And Steve, really kind of explained to me. He said, we can do just as much business with 3/4 the overhead if we combine forces. And he showed me exactly how it was going to work. And he sold me half of his business for a non-recourse note, which showed confidence on his part that it was going to work, and his company bought some of the assets of my company, and I sold the rest of them to my employees, and I used the money that he paid me to pay my creditors. And within, and everything that he said came true. And I had all my creditors paid off in, just a few months, and had the note paid off in, a year or a year and a half, something like that. And, he knew exactly what the numbers were gonna be, and really, when he explained it to me, I knew he was right.
And I understand that the deal is that you had to move to Texas.
I had to move to Texas because
Right.
he was married and I wasn't.
Right.
So I was, and I liked Dallas anyway. It wasn't really that big a give up. I didn't like the weather in New England that
And
much.
you had just had two
I believe our
terrible
negotiations. I believe
winters.
our negotiations were in the winter of '82.
Yeah, and no state income tax was pretty nice. I mean, there were a lot of advantages, and really no disadvantages that I could think of.
Except August.
Yeah. Well, I always figured I could leave,
which you did.
which I do now every summer. So yeah, it was one of my better decisions, and I've made some really good decisions in my life and some really bad ones, and this is one of the best ones.
And Jim, how did you go from having, in your words, no numismatic experience to writing in 1990 How to Grade U.S. Coins, a step-by-step approach to the grading of uncirculated and proof coins? How did that happen for you?
There wasn't really a standard. Everybody kind of had it. Every coin dealer was their own grading service back then, and I think I wrote the book before that. I don't know. I think there was a version of the book that came out in the 80s. Maybe 86 or 87, actually. And I thought, this really needs to be standardized, or it's got a problem. It's, there's too much friction in the market. It's not, you can't really track what a coin is worth. So I just kind of looked back at how I look at coins, and tried to analyze what I was kind of doing without thinking. And I broke it down into strike and marks and sort of where the marks mattered and where they didn't, and luster and that sort of thing, and eye appeal, and tried to sort of mathematically weight it and come up with a system, and then I tested it by looking at different coins and seeing if that really adhered to the system, and I kind of adjusted it. It was really almost like an engineering project more than a writing project, because I'm not a naturally talented writer. I have to just use brute force to write anything. But I was pretty focused on it, and I think it was a pretty good book, and PCGS and NGC basically use those standards today. So I'm really proud of it. I think it helped the industry get to a point where coins, in my opinion, are absolutely the most frictionless of any kind of hard asset. More frictionless than art, more frictionless than any of the other collectibles. And I think that's a big advantage to people who want to buy and sell coins. Coins are a better deal than almost any other, than anything you can buy, really, other than stocks, I would say, at least for somebody that doesn't spend their whole life studying it.
Thanks,
Well,
Jim.
I'll add to that.
Yes.
Part you asked, he answered a lot of why. Somehow, the how between the time he started and the time he got there is he probably looked at like 40 million coins. A lot.
Oh, yeah, probably less than 40
Oh
million.
yeah, that's an exaggeration, but it's, he has a very good photographic memory for coins, and he was able to bring a lot of that to bear.
Steve, you must have had a lot of confidence in yourself and your abilities to go into the coin business against the many seasoned dealers who were out there at the time. And at a young age, you not only started your own business, but also hired people to work for you, including your grandmother as your accountant. From where did you get that vision? Where did that vision come from?
It was pretty much born from ignorance. I mean, the fact of the matter is when you're young, you don't really, people are telling you, you can't do this, you can't do that. I didn't have a lot of that. I was so young. That was before the point people told me that, you start reading. And nowadays it's probably even more true than it was then, but there were incredibly low barriers of entry. And my goal each month was to make a profit. I didn't really look, 6 months or a year or 5 years out. It was like, I'm in the coin business now. I'm not going to college. I've got a little bit of money. I want to turn that little bit of money into a little bit more money next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. So it wasn't like I had a great vision and planned out of this rise from where we started then, or where I started then to where I am now. It was, pretty much, 1 month at a time. Even today, we look out 6 months or a year, but we don't have a grand 5-year plan. It's basically to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. And obviously it was on a much smaller scale, 45 years ago, but it was the same basic premise. Just try to create enough gross profit and make sure your expenses are less than your gross profit. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, you want to maximize your options.
Right.
Is basically.
Before the two of you partnered to form Heritage in 1982, what did you think of one another? What made you believe you could work well together? And Steve, I want to start with your thoughts first.
Well, Jim and I had always been friends. We had a bond, obviously, through coins. We were two of probably 20 qualified Wonder Boys at the time, and young Turks. And by the way, all the older guys in this business were incredibly nice to us. I mean, it was
Always.
always. I mean, the Abe Kossoffs of the world, the Jerry Christ. I mean,
Julian.
Well, not Julian, but I mean, all they were all. It's an incredibly embracing community. So, but going back to Jim, we always had a bond. We always were able to talk to one another.
Yeah, we went out to dinner every coin show.
We talked. We could relate to one another. I think we intellectually stimulated one another with ideas and talked about things beside coins.
Yeah, and we didn't really try to we each wanted to have a better business than the other one had, but we didn't want to do it by making the other one's business worse.
Right.
We shared ideas, and we understood that a bigger pie was better for both of us.
And the industry, going back to these older guys and everybody in this room and all our friends, it's never really been a zero-sum game for any of us. We've always, there's obviously examples where we're going up head-to-head against somebody.
And you want to win that battle, but it doesn't mean that you want them to do poorly. You just want to,
And to give you another example, I'm not sure how many Dallas coin dealers are in here, but all the Dallas coin dealers back in the 70s and 80s had a bond as well. We weren't trying to cut each other's throats. There's always exceptions to that, but I'm not sure what it is about collecting, the DNA, the business. We were very, very fortunate as individuals and as a group to be in a business that was basically growing the entire time. There were new opportunities, and because of that, there was plenty for everybody. We wanted a little bit more than everybody, but there was still plenty. but there was still plenty for everybody.
And is obviously you two work together very well. Is there anything about one another that annoys you?
Absolutely.
Are you kidding?
Yeah. How much time do we have left? No, Yeah, I mean you know, here's several of our partners over here. They can speak firsthand. I mean, we're always at each other's throats.
Well, we're always arguing. We're always arguing our positions.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but you know, I mean, there's nobody in the coin business I would rather be partners with.
That's great.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's great.
We do argue.
Did
a lot.
I hear
We're
someone
But we
say
argue,
aw?
sure.
We're a little bit like, you know,
So-
he's my day wife.
Well, Steve, you talk of your successes in in numismatics as riding a wave, and as we all know, waves do crash. But your ability to recognize when those waves will crest and fall has kept you from completely wiping out. Where would you be today if precious metals and subsequently the coin market had not dropped dramatically in the early 1980s?
We probably wouldn't be partners, first of all, because that's what led to our coming together. I mean, Heritage did or not Heritage, Steve Ivywear Coin Company did very poorly in that time. I mean, coins went down probably 75% in value over a 2-year period. Gold went from $900 an ounce to like $200 an ounce, and it was very, very dramatic.
It was ugly. It was
You
ugly.
know, that's when the Fed raised interest rates to 18 or 19% or 21%, and it was awful. And frankly, Jim, not to go into great detail, but Jim's and our merger was also it was a tale of two buildings. Jim entered into a relationship buying a building in Boston that went very, very south on him. I fortunately bought a building in Dallas in 1980, I guess it was, and did very, very well on that. So I was able to sell that in '82, and frankly, had I not been able to do that, our business wouldn't have been as strong. And strong is a very relative term at that point in time. But we had, you know, not a lot of bank debt and enough money to pay that off and enough money to have a decent inventory. But even at that, my net worth had probably gone down 75% over that 3-year period, or 50%. And
Better than 110%.
110%. So you know that led to our getting together. And it also teaches you lessons. I mean, I don't know that it'd be incorrect to say that I never fell off a wave. What would be more correct is I was a good swimmer, you know.
Jim, I found it interesting that you said that it's a challenge for you to write, and I find that particularly interesting because in addition to your full-time work with Heritage, you've found time to write 2 novels, both under development for feature films, and you're donating all the royalties to health and education charities, and I wondered if you'd tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this was during the mid-1990s, and it was, you know, really kind of before the internet. Wasn't much interesting going on in the coin business. Our auction business was okay, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't first tier yet. The internet really is what catapulted us to the top of that field. And so we were basically a coin wholesaler, and I just wasn't interested in that business particularly. And so I told Steve I was going on half-time, and he was, you know, pretty understanding about it. And I had English was my worst subject in school. It was, you know, it was just
still made
not
like a 720 on his SATs. So.
It was, you know, I was a math geek, you know, basically, and I thought I had a really good idea for a novel, and I wanted to write it. And I thought, you know, this is probably the only chance I'll get, the only time I'm going to have time to do it. And so that's what I did.
And tell us the topic of that first book.
It was called The Truth Machine, and it was a sort of a futuristic science fiction novel about what would happen if somebody invented a foolproof lie detector. And It started out maybe the size of a desk, and eventually it got smaller and smaller, and people would wear them on their, on their tie clips and aim them at their kids, and you couldn't lie anymore and get away with it, and what this would do in the world. And it was like a 50 or 60 year time frame, and I got to speculate about what the future would look like, and it was really fun to write. I couldn't write dialogue. The dialogue is so terrible. I can't even read the dialogue without cringing. But the story is really good, and it was a huge. It was kind of a phenomenon. It got up to #2 on Amazon. It was the second bestseller in the UK. It was, sold hundreds of thousands of copies all over the world. And it's still in development, but it hasn't been made. But I still think it's a great story. Just somebody else should rewrite the dialogue.
Somebody needs to update it a little bit.
And it needs to be updated. And if we ever have a really boring couple of years at Heritage, I might update it. I don't know, but I don't see that happening. Heritage is just so interesting now. I can't imagine doing anything else.
And tell us a little bit about the charities that you're very fond of, that you like to support.
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, I actually now I donate 25% of my income. And I intend to give pretty much everything away before, hopefully before I die, but maybe after. My kids will get enough to, get a little head start, but they're going to have to work. I think that they'll be better for it, and they know that. Gail and I kind of decide what we're going to give the money to together,
and along the same lines, I know, Steve, you have a great passion for the past, and your outside interests include books and manuscripts about Texas history, and that you also sit on the boards of the Texas Historical Foundation and the Dallas Historical Society. That's correct?
Well, I have. I don't. No longer do.
No longer do that.
Those are both.
You said that the numismatist you would most like to meet is B. Max Mail, and it might seem obvious, but is it the historical nature of numismatics that first and foremost captures your attention?
Oh, absolutely. Both the business itself and the coin dealers from bygone days, as well as the history. I mean, I was always fascinated, and I suspect everybody in this room shares that passion of holding a coin in your hands that George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or anybody could have used, and the whole set building aspect of it. It was just something that was that I always say that collecting is a genetic disorder, and I had it in spades, and still do. I would love to collect. I don't have time to collect anymore, so running a business is also a passion for me. So.
Following up on that then, Steve and Jim, the Heritage Auctions specializes in such a great variety of collectibles, including comic books, fine and decorative art, music and entertainment, manuscripts, and my favorite, movie posters. If you could have purchased any one item from one of your sales over the last few years, what would it have been?
Oh, I'd have to think about that.
We collect comics.
Yeah, and we've sold, like all the great comics and comic art. So that's, there's so many things that I wish I had bought, especially since that market is so hot. It's just because of all the movies. It's really been one of the fastest appreciating assets that you could have bought in the last 15 or 20 years.
Do you still have a collection of comics yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
He has probably the finest collection of Mad magazines in the world.
But I definitely have that disorder. but part of it is also I just want to be connected to the company in that way and experience what our clients experience, because I kind of, I don't really run our web initiative per se, but I do meet with the team, almost every week, and I want to be able to give them feedback and talk about what I think we should be focusing on. And so it kind of helps for me to participate in some of our auctions, I think.
And I know there's another Sunday night internet sale coming up here just on the 6th.
You mean of the movie posters? Actually, it's interesting. The weekly auctions have been a really, really successful part of the business, even though they're a small fraction of the dollar volume, because people really get used to coming back on the same day every week. And it's Sundays, and it's Sundays for comics and movie posters. Tuesdays for currency. Thursdays for books. It's different nights, but the participants are used to, if it's that day of the week, they know that they have to go to the heritage site and see what's on there and see if they want to leave any bids. So they kind of get addicted to it. The movie poster customers call our site heritagecrack.com. I've never heard any comic bidders call it that, but.
And Steve, was there anything in particular that Heritage has sold over the last few years that you really wish you could have picked up for yourself?
Probably not. I mean, as much as I love everything, the trouble is I haven't been able to focus on what, and plus ever since we got into jewelry, Linda makes most of those decisions.
Jim, you strongly believe that numismatics is a pursuit that's open to everyone, and that even coin dealing has, quote, low barriers to entry, unquote. You also say that numismatic items as collectibles have great appeal. Nevertheless, hobby participation has remained fairly static for many years, at least in coin collecting, certainly. And do you have any specific thoughts about how we can build interest in numismatics?
Well, gosh, I'm a little more optimistic, I think, than most of the people that I talk to, but maybe that's because my kids were so obsessed with state quarters when they were in middle school. And I think that we do have about 75 million kids that will remember that they collected coins for a few years when they get older and have money. And generally, a certain percentage of the population collect what they collected as kids. So I'm very optimistic about coins for that reason. Plus, I think that they have just tremendous inherent appeal. They're artistic, they're money, they're made by US governments, not by, a chewing gum company, or, certainly not that I have anything against sports cards. I really, really love sports cards now. But, I think I would have to pick coins if I were looking at something to collect, from a completely logical perspective. And of course, collectors are not logical completely, but they're somewhat logical, and they want a good deal. And I think coins as a hobby will last. Mm-hmm. How we get that message out, I don't know. It's probably only a matter of time before it gets out by itself, but we're certainly counting on the ANA to help.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, you note that 75 to 80% of American numismatists today started collecting in the 1950s and 60s, when computer games and the many hundreds of television channels were not vying for their time and attention. What do you see as the next wave of numismatic interest?
International. Yeah, I'm not convinced that we're ever going to see. I'm not convinced that the heyday, the glory days of U.S. numismatics is not in the rearview mirror. I'm not totally pessimistic, because between the internet and increased wealth and the inherent great qualities that numismatics have, I'm sure there'll be many collectors. I mean, this was a great business 100 years ago. So there's nothing that says it's not going to be a great business 100 years from now. I don't necessarily think we're going to have that 5, 10 million people that collected in the 50s and the 60s, follow. I mean, 20 years now, 30 years from now, a lot of those people aren't going to be with us. Now, Jim primarily, we send out 4,500 copies of Longevity magazine every year.
Prevention.
I'm sorry, prevention. So we're sort of hoping to keep the current as long as possible. I think the growth of wealth in third countries, not third world countries anymore, but China, Southeast Asia, India, Brazil, countries like that. Some of them are having their ups and downs, but I think over the next 40 or 50 years, as those countries, but their middle class expands. China's middle class has gone from 20 million people to 350 million people in the last 30 years. Those people, right now there is a huge boom in China. Actually, more so with stamps than with coins, but coins will be close behind. So, whereas the coin collecting community in the U.S. may have gone from a few million people down to 500,000 or whatever the numbers are, and depending on how you classify a coin collector, I think those numbers are going to be dwarfed by collectors worldwide getting into coins, buying back their heritage. And with the internet, we're all next door now anyway. So I think the coin business, globally, is going to be a much bigger business than it is today, 20 years from now or 30 years from now, but it's going to be less dominated by the U.S.
Back to your question, if you asked me what could be done to, and back to what I said about state quarters and the fact that my kids now can recite all 50 states and their capitals in alphabetical order, which I could never do. I don't understand why we haven't issued presidential quarters. I know we have the presidential dollars, but those didn't circulate. I don't know why we haven't issued quarters for the Bill of Rights and all the amendments to the Constitution, because certainly we want our school kids to know that. Mm-hmm. And I think that not only would that be good for numismatics, but that would be good for the country. Because obviously we have a problem with people not really understanding how government works. Some people these days, and I think everybody agrees that smarter school kids will lead to a better country in the future. So I hope the ANA can help work toward convincing the Mint to issue presidential quarters and constitutional quarters.
Yeah, some great ideas. Thank you, Jim. Before we go to our last question this evening, I wanted to open up the floor to audience questions, and we'll take 3 or 4 or more questions. Amber Bradish is here. She's going to have a microphone, and so if you'd like to ask these gentlemen a question, just raise your hand, and she will bring a mic to you. And
no, don't ask that guy.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
This question is for Steve Ivey. In the late 60s and early...
Doesn't involve me writing a check, does it?
What?
Does it involve me writing a check?
You can write a check now and I won't answer the question. In the late 60s and early 70s, you were a mainstay in Southern California, and particularly around the Long Beach show. And during that time, we could always find you in front of the A-Mark table having a very lovely young lady show you coins again and again and again. There was one particular time I came into the show with my partner at the time, Joel Ratu, and I bet him $5 that she wouldn't have a thing to do with him. I lost that $5, and I've been angry ever since. But all I want to know is, how did you convince that beautiful young lady, who's still a very lovely woman, to come to Texas, to leave California and come to Texas with you?
Chloroform and duct tape.
Yes, another question.
Going back to 1982, it was a brutal time. There's no question about it. I think I probably still owed you both money in 1982. But you said that you started talking in the winter of '82, or because
After that, no, it was after that.
yeah, because you had the A&A auction in '82. It was in Boston.
You had the A&A auction in '82, didn't you?
It wasn't in Boston. It was 81 was in Boston, wasn't it? No,
82.
82 was in Boston.
82 was Boston.
That was you.
No, you had it.
Did
I think you had it in Boston. I think you had it. But
We
Yeah, I think we started talking after that.
after and it was, but who started the conversation?
Steve
I
did.
did.
Steve started the conversation, and I mean it was obviously a brilliant idea, but I just was wondering.
Yeah,
about
I didn't have as many brilliant ideas in '82 as he did. And before. But I had a little lull.
Yeah, I want to ask you. Could you speak a little bit about you guys have been built a giant coin company that everybody knows about, and can you speak a little bit about how you guys decided you were going to take on just the coin business, or you're going to take on the world as far as like the auctions and Christie's and Sotheby's and that a little bit, and how that decision came about?
Either one.
Okay, I'll give it a start, and Jim will jump in. As most of you know, in the mid to late '90s, Jim was a big proponent of everything. All of us were, but Jim was really pressing for us to embrace the internet in a big way. And
Probably because my novels were on Amazon, and I saw what every writer on Amazon was on there every day. And everything they were doing just made sense to me.
And we were
It was
right, and we were all very aware of it, and so we decided to build out a website at the time, and give away information as it related to our auctions up to that point, and build a platform for auctions. And it was pretty crude by today's standards, but it was pretty good by standards of 1998, 99. And all of a sudden, we started, we were probably number 3 or number 4 coin auction company at the time. And for over about a 3-year period, we went from being number 3 or 4 to number 1. And we said, wow, this is really working good. All the time we were making improvements to our website, and it was getting better and better. More visitors, everything was working out well. And then we decided, or Jim said, why don't we try something else? And he came up with comics, and we looked at him and said, what, are you crazy? Nobody collects comic books except you. And so he said, well, I'll actually consign a good portion of my books to get it started. And we said, okay, under those circumstances, it was really sort of a no-lose proposition for us. And coincidentally, one of his neighbors actually did movie posters. And so we decided to throw some movie posters into it as well. And then that sale did remarkably well. We sold a little under $1 million, and it was profitable for us. And we said, well, hey, this is fun, let's do it again. Now, obviously, it was still, like an afterthought for us. And the second sale brought $2.3 million, and that was like
that was the biggest comic sale ever at that time.
Right, that was like 4 months later, or 5 months later, and we said, hey, this is really working out well again. So we did it another time. And in the next sale, I don't remember if it was 3 months later or 6 months later.
It was July.
Okay, it brought $5 million, which at that point in time was more than Christie's and Sotheby's did in the comic business a year. And I think the next full year we did about $19 million in comics, and we knew we were on to something. Obviously, Jim had good knowledge of that. We hired some people that had good knowledge of that business, and we decided, well, let's try something else. And we were discussing today. We're not even sure what number 2 was, but we think it was sports cards.
No, it was definitely sports.
Sports cards.
Yeah.
And my son was getting out of school at the time, out of college. Actually, he'd been out of college and had gone to work for SGC in New Jersey as sort of an apprentice and try to learn to grade cards. And,
that was back when John Albanese owned it.
Right. And he came back after that, and we said, okay, you're officially in charge of sports. And I think his office was like 8 by 8 at the time. And I think he bought and sold for a while, just to get his bearings. And then I think it was like a year and a half later, we decided to have an auction there. And that auction brought about $1 million, or maybe even less. And I don't exactly remember the growth pattern from there, but this year they'll do about $50 million in sports, and now we dominate that area. Like with probably a 50% market share. Movie posters, by the way, spun off, and it has like a 70% market share. And
Same guy.
Yeah, same guy.
My neighbor.
And so each year we started adding about, depending, we're very opportunistic, and if we found an expert that we thought they knew what they were doing, we gave them a little rope. Some of them hung themselves, some of them didn't.
Well, in comics, what we did, I don't know if you remember this, but in comics, what we would do is I would meet these guys on eBay, and I would invite them to come up and guest catalog. Because when we would have an auction catalog, we would have all these coins that had to be, all these comics that had to be cataloged, and it's harder to catalog comics than coins because they're not as standardized. So we would fly these guys in for a week or 2 weeks or something, and they would catalog for us, and we'd spec them out. We'd scope them out and see how good they were, and eventually we wound up hiring just the best comics experts in the country by trying, like 100 of them and hiring 5.
And so all our first other categories were collectible oriented. And then we started getting off, I think we got up to about 15 categories before we got into fine art. Mm-hmm. And started adding categories within fine art, and now basically we're up to 40 categories. So it's sort of, I don't know that we've topped out, but there's, we've got all the main ones, books and manuscripts, and jewelry's now a big one for us.
All the main ones except cars.
Yeah, and that's probably never going to happen, so that's basically how we got here. None of it was particularly planned. It's just, Jim and I can't get out of our own way sometimes, and we're very aggressive. And rather than say, hey,
we have trouble saying no.
Right. I'm 66. Jim is 63, and both of us operate under the illusion that we're,
12,
30 years younger. We've literally been doing the whole this all our lives. So I don't feel any different when I get up in the morning at age 66 than I did when I was 40. It takes me a little longer to get down the stairs, okay, and a little longer to get up. But other than that, I feel pretty much the same. I've been blessed in that regard. And we just have too much fun doing what we're doing. So if somebody shows up at our doorstep tomorrow and says, hey, I want to sell model trains, and this is the size of the market, and this is my expertise, and it makes sense, we're probably going to do it, even though it's going to be an extra headache for us, and it's going to have 3 more people, and one of them's going to get in a fight with their husband, and get all the HR problems and stuff. But we're all we're gluttons for punishment, and because we enjoy it, we're sort of addicted to it, frankly. But anyway, that's how we end. I'm not sure how we ended up the way we are. Every once in a while, I wake up and say,
What am I doing?
Wake up and say, what the hell? How did we get here? But
we're pretty lucky.
Yeah, we're just And I'll make another point. people say, your overhead is X. How can you get up in the morning and know that you have to make Y that day? And that's not the way we look at it. That's not the way I look at it, because they're all different little businesses. They share accounting and they share IT and whatever. But hey, if a division isn't making money, I mean, we can close that down, and so it's not quite as ominous as you might think it is, and we're used to it.
Do we have any other questions?
I've been
Now, just remember, your bonus is coming up.
I've been very fortunate to be an employee at Heritage for 23 years, and I think one of the keys that to our success has been transparency. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about our philosophy of transparency.
Well, that really was an internet observation. I think that I just noticed, kind of in the mid to late 90s that the internet was going to make information more accessible, and you could either fight that or embrace it. And almost every decision we made embraced it. We started disclosing reserves in advance, which the major auction houses in New York still don't do. But we're more of an internet philosophy company, and so we decided we would. And when we offer an item on our site, we try to get as much third-party information about that item onto the page as we possibly can, even if that information is negative. Very similar to Amazon book reviews, where they let people write bad things about the books or other items that they're trying to sell. It just makes sense because it gives your clients more confidence to do business with you and feel that they're going to get what they expect. And so pretty much everything that we do at Heritage is with the idea of removing as much friction as we can and as much of the sort of clouding of information as we can. And it's really pretty easy because we started, we kind of started really in the auction business in the late 1990s rather than in the 1700s like like the other major auction houses did. So I kind of feel like we have the same advantage in that business that Amazon has had in books and now in kind of almost everything else. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
This is sort of like a P&G meeting for you.
A little bit. So you had stamps for a while, and you closed it kind of within a year. It kind of seems to me. Do you think you can see bringing that back?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. We were in stamps twice. We were in stamps
3 times if you include
New
England.
No,
right.
I know that.
In the 80s, through the 80s, we built a pretty good stamp business and sold it in 91 and did pretty well off that. About, I guess now maybe 6 years ago, as you pointed out, we got into the stamp business because when we sold the business in 1993,
something like that, 92.
We signed a 15-year non-compete, which was, so we really couldn't even get back into the stamp business in 2007. So we were all excited.
We were spring-loaded to get back into the stamp business.
We were all excited about getting in the stamp business, okay? And so we went out and we hired some people. We got all geared up. We got everything ready from the internet's perspective, all our indexes done.
Yeah, and we thought it was going to be perfect because PSE was certifying stamps.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
it was a certified collectible. How could we fail?
It was going to just add water.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me to go back and talk about what we were talking about a moment ago when Barbara asked the question about, rejuvenating the coin business. Well, I make this joke that this year the average stamp collector is 82, and next year the average stamp collector will be 83. So we thought, hey, they're going to embrace the internet. I mean, because there really wasn't a good stamp company out there that really did embrace the internet. So we had our first auction. Now, to give you an idea, by this time in a coin sale, we get 2,500, 3,500 absentee bidders on the internet and 7 bid sheets. Okay, it used to be, just for people that don't go that far back, 30 years ago, we get hundreds and hundreds of bid sheets and a couple of faxes and a few telephone bidders. Okay, and that was the absentee bidding. Fast
And
forward.
we'd get 100 people show up in person.
And that's the big part. And so anyway, fast forward to 2008, and we get 3,500 absentee bidders and 7 bid sheets. Well, first stamp sale we ran, okay, we knew we were in trouble because we got 500 bid sheets and 6 internet bidders, okay? And so we tried to promote, hey, we sent out and said, this is how you bid on the internet, okay? So you really need to try this because it's really, really cool, okay? I think the next time we got 12 internet bidders and 490 bid sheets. Actually, we got 460 bid sheets because we had total number of all bidders because 40 people died in the meantime. and so after a while, after about 4 years, or not 4 years, like another
4
year,
sales, probably.
four sales, we looked at each other and said, this isn't working. So God bless them. There's a lot of really nice stamp guys.
And it might work now, actually.
Well, it might work. It's not.
But we're traumatized.
Yeah.
So it's going to at least be a couple more years.
It's probably going to work. It's probably going to work overseas. It probably will work overseas because they do have young.
Yeah, it will work overseas.
China actually has more stamp collectors than they have coin collectors, and they have a lot of coin collectors. So one of these days, if we figure out how to open up there, it would be good. Mm-hmm. Jim mentioned an interesting phenomenon that I'm sure all of you guys have seen. It used to be when we'd have an auction, 200 people would show up or 300 people would show up. They still will for a platinum night, but mainly just to watch. Before we had hundreds of active bidders in a showroom, in an auction room. Now you look at an auction room and you go,
Where is everybody?
Where is everybody? Well, they've all leaving absentee bids. They're all on HA Live. That's why when we have the cameras there, we don't pan the room because there wouldn't be anybody there. But so
we consider an empty sales room to be a badge of honor because it means that we're saving our clients time and they trust us. And I think that the smaller your in-person attendance is, the better job you're doing.
Which is sometimes hard to convey to a consignor from 30 years.
Yeah, I mean anybody under 60 gets that, but some of the older consignors don't. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like being there.
Yeah, and I've told people that just put it out there. I promise you're not going to get screwed.
Well, thank you all for your questions. And I wanted to ask one last question. Jim and Steve, in numismatics and in life, what would you like your legacy to be? And Jim, let's begin with you.
Well, I would prefer not to die, so I don't know. I honestly, I don't think about that much. I mean, I guess my legacy, I hope, will be my kids, and I think that I want to have set a good example for them, and that's pretty much it for me.
Great. And Steve, how about you?
He pretty much stole my answer. I mean, it's our Jim and I both have very, very close families. We're all very close-knit, and
we're both really proud of our kids.
And we're both very proud of our kids, and I don't think you could have a better legacy than that, to be honest with you. We hope heritage goes on. You know, we have a lot of young partners here. Most of them are pretty good guys.
Yeah, I think we have a very deep bench
Yes.
at Heritage. So I don't think we're really worried about what's going to happen to Heritage after we're gone. So, because you know, we just have a great team, you know, and we know how they think, and I think we have a lot of confidence that they could run the company probably better than we can. Not that we're in a hurry for that to happen,
Right.
but we're fortunate. And I don't want to sound braggadocious, but we like to consider ourselves the Yankees of the coin business, and we get a lot of. I mean, we get a lot of really good young people coming to work at Heritage, and
I think it's everybody's first choice.
Right, and we try to embrace them because Jim and I were in that same position about 1 million years ago, but we still have this vague recollection of it, and we have a pretty exciting company, and we're pretty forward thinking, and it's, you know, and for whatever reason, a lot of really young, smart kids. There may not be a lot of them in terms of, but you know, there's enough of them that I think they're going to keep this business alive for a long period of time.
And the most talented ones, they stay. They don't leave. So
because it's a really fun, it's really a fun business.
Yeah.
Well, Steve and Jim, thank you very much, and thank you all in the audience for participating in this 4th ANA Legacy Series. Jim and Steve will be available to talk with guests and sign autographs at the table to my right. So again, thank you, and please come again next time.
Thank you.